And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thank you so much for joining us on another news review, come just a day before we go out. And I'm delighted to have a brand new guest whose name I've certainly known for a long time because of his political life, because of his media life, and that is Lembit Öpik. Lembit, thanks so much for your time today.
It's great to be here, and thanks for giving me the chance to share my views on, I suppose, libertarianism.
Well, it's a lot of stories to cover, and it'll be good. And obviously, people can find you. That is your Twitter page. People can follow you there. And of course, on TNT, what you run every Monday to Friday in the mornings. Do you want to just let us know kind of how people can find you and what that is about?
Yeah, thanks for letting me promote my show. I do the breakfast show, which is also the drive time show for the world's first fully functioning online TV station. It's not a podcast outfit. It's a TV station based in Brisbane, but I operate from the UK and we have presenters from all over the world. My timings, if you are in the United Kingdom, are 0800 till 10 a.m. British summertime, Monday to Friday, which is afternoon in Australia and middle of the night in America. But that's 2 hours every day. We share the facts and our opinions. All you have to bring to the party is your ability to develop a point of view.
And you certainly share those on TNT Radio, and I've been on numerous programs, including yours, Lembit, and I always enjoy it. Let's jump into a couple of stories, and then we've one US story for the war and posse, so they don't miss out, and then all the chaos in the destruction of free speech in the UK. But let's start with a good news story. And this was pro-life activist arrested for praying outside UK abortion centre receives big police payout. And I just put this up for Fox because it's good that this is reported outside the UK. But she was silently praying outside an abortion facility, has received £13,000, so $17,000 from the West Midlands Police after filing a claim, false imprisonment, assault and wrongful arrest. I remember watching the video of Isabel being arrested. I think you've had her on your show, Lembit. What kind of are your thoughts around this whole thing, and how did it get to this point?
My thoughts are that this is a prima facie example of the precedent being set for the introduction of thought crime in British politics and justice. My opinion about what happened here is simple. The West Midlands Police felt authorized to arrest twice Isabel Vaughan Spruce for the crime of standing silently, non-invasively, praying. That's all she was doing. And then she was released. She was arrested again. And the £13,000 compensation was because Suella Braverman, who was a big name in the former Conservative government, intervened and said, this is absolutely ridiculous. You're right. She was on my show, in fact, in the week just finished. And her position is very clear. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't trying to actively influence anyone. I was simply praying for unborn children. Now, you don't have to be a Christian to understand that in a free country, you're entitled to do that. It raises three questions. First of all, how did we get here? The question that you asked. Well, my answer is by the relentless discounting of our right to liberty by a government that literally just doesn't care. That this, of course, happened under the Conservatives, and they let it happen. Secondly, the question is, what are the implications for freedom? Well, the implications are Orwellian. It means that you can think yourself to prosecution as far as the West Midlands Police are concerned. You can think yourself to a situation whereby doing absolutely nothing but harboring a thought which is displeasing to the establishment, you could end up in a court of law. And thirdly, the question is, what does the government think? Well, the current government didn't show remorse. They didn't say, well, we have to rethink how terrible this is. They said, we have to think about how to do this better. Put all that together, and we are now in a situation, Peter, where the very worst example of thought crime, something like Minority Report, which is a very chilling film, is beginning to be writ large in British society. And I had a fourth question. Would they do that to a Muslim who had been standing there praying silently?
We've yet to see that. Just before we move on, you obviously were in Parliament for 13 years. You were a Liberal Democrat MP, and I'd love to hear about your journey from there to where you are, because I'm sure you wouldn't be accepting the Lib Dems now with your outlandish views. But just back from Parliament, I mean, did you remember anything like this coming up back? You were from 1997 to 2010. I couldn't imagine this type of thing coming up in Parliament then, and yet it seems to be the norm now.
The seeds had been sown before even then, Peter. You may recall an embarrassing time when people associated with the IRA, which was a proscribed terrorist group in Northern Ireland, where you and I grew up, weren't allowed to speak on television. So they ended up being filmed, but having the voice of an actor, simply regurgitating what they were saying. It was preposterous. The second thing is, I learned as a member of Parliament, as long as you're not directly threatening the state, you can say what you like. Once you get close to uncomfortable and inconvenient truths, you do get shut down. I and others uncovered murders at Deep Cut Army Barracks. I'll say it again. No one's ever tried to sue me or prosecute me for it. And the closer we got to the truth, the harder it was to make progress. And mysteriously, our witnesses would suddenly find themselves in mysterious trouble or suspended for things nothing to do with what we were campaigning on. But there was too much of a coincidence with the people who were doing that, who were being shut down repeatedly by the state. So I could see this was happening then, but I didn't ever think we'd get to a stage where you would be arrested for silent prayer as a Christian in a place which is proximate, but not exactly outside an abortion centre. And it's got a lot worse since then. Sadly, also, we now have a government which doesn't care.
Well, we'll see what happens with this government. It'll be this type of thing turbocharged, but it's at least it's good to start with a good news story. Now, here is maybe a less good story: the rollout of more hate crime legislation, and that is misogyny to be treated as extremism by UK government. Extreme misogyny, and I'll get your thoughts on what extreme means, but will be treated as a form. So extreme misogyny will be treated as a form of extremism. Circular argument. Under new government plans, the Home Office have said, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, has ordered a review of the UK's counter-extremism strategy to determine how best to tackle threats posed by harmful ideologies, and this will look at hatred of women. What are your thoughts on this move to actually legislate against feelings and emotions?
Well, as a Christian myself, I utterly oppose a policy which will, by the way, under terrorist legislation, that's what they want to use here. That's what Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, wants to use. Under terrorist legislation, will make terrorists of lots and lots of people who, for example, would publicly promote aspects of the Quran. Have they realized they're going to illegalize Muslims who literally take parts of the Quran, which are quite critical of women, that seriously? Oh, no, of course, that's not what they mean, because we live in two-tier Britain with two-tier Starmer. This is insanity. And of course, they don't mean the Muslim population. Of course, if you do mean that, Yvette Cooper, why don't you get in touch with Peter and then put your side? What they are thinking of is people almost certainly like Andrew Tate, the Tate brothers, who've been in the press quite a lot, who they regard as misogynists. And there's another double whammy example of two-tier thinking here. Yvette Cooper, when she talked about this, didn't say a word about misandry. What's misandry? Hatred of men. So even without intending it, she has put on the record evidence that we live in a two-tier society where if you're hating of women, extremely hating of women, you're a terrorist. But if you're extremely hating of men, that's fine. I can hardly believe that people with that lack of intellectual capability are now in positions like Home Secretary and I have to say Prime Minister.
I think it was on when Lotus Eaters on Monday were talking about this, and Carl was said a cabal of feminists, and he was talking about like Stella Creasy, Jess Phillips, Yvette Cooper, and others. And it seems to be this real hatred of men. And I don't know why they don't actually. Really, they should fix probably the rape figures, the charging of rape, which is what 2% ends up in conviction. They should surely that should be hatred against women, and instead it will be a hurdy word. And of course, you're right. The Tate brothers are their pin-up of the worst of the worst.
Yes, two further problems here. The Yvette Coopers of the world think that by criminalizing a thought, you silence the thought. Anyone who's lived under oppression or under the jackboot of an authoritarian state, whether in the United Kingdom or in Gaza or many other places, will know that when you drive thoughts underground, you ferment dissent in a much more militant way. That's arguably what happened in Northern Ireland. It was only when people sat around a table and started shouting that the shooting stopped. There's a second problem here as well. Who defines it? Who defines extreme misogyny? I don't want Yvette Cooper to be doing that. As I say, she's already proved that she's willing to have a two-tier system here. And within that, how on earth can they not understand that a significant proportion of abuse is against men? Why have they had the extreme sexual prejudice to say that they want to stop violence against women when they should be stopping violence against all abused people? I've known a lot of men who've been abused by women, but that doesn't count, Peter, because they are so blinkered in their thinking that they're willing to enshrine extreme sexism in legislation, which further isolates often suicidal men who have no recourse now and will have the legislation against them if they dare to ask for a level playing field with abused women.
Yeah, when Philip Davis was MP, raising this issue and getting mocked and ridiculed for standing up, and we've had Matt O'Connor on lots and the work he does, Father for Justice, and that whole area is completely forgotten. But yeah, this is what we face here in the UK. And if the US are not careful, we'll just do a single US story. And this is my good friend Jason Miller posting this, harassed by the numbers. Of course, the DNC convention just finished. And Kamala Harris has gone from someone no one wanted to someone supposedly the Democrats want. But yeah, Harris by the numbers. 0 primaries won during the 2020 because she was selected, not elected. 0 sit-down interviews before becoming the nominee. And it goes on and on. 0 policy pages. I saw an interview or talking to different people at the DNC and asking them, what policy is it? And none of them could name a single policy. But what are your thoughts looking at this from across the pond? What is happening stateside?
The difference between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is that Joe Biden was intelligent once. Sure. Kamala Harris has never displayed that quality. Indeed, even commentators who seem sympathetic to her in the mainstream media implicitly concede that she wasn't really known for anything until she got propelled to the position of Democratic president of the US. As a candidate. It's unbelievable. I think I would summarize her entire policy position as follows, Peter. Because that's what she says more often than anything else. This woman must be a great cook, because most of the time when she's off script, she generates word salad. The rest of the time she's on script and she's just reading stuff out. And you would think that her script writers would throw in some kind of substantive policy points, but instead they commit the logical incontinence of her saying that we need a change of direction. Where was she for the last years? I thought she was the vice president. So a change of direction from what? From her? And this is the problem. My feeling is that the mainstream media really has lost contact here. They were talking during the week about Kamala's great speech and the feeling at the Democrat conference and convention about how popular she is and so on. But it was insubstantial nonsense. My worry, therefore, is that she has closed the gap. It's possible she'll win, but that will throw the United States, and to an extent global politics, into a dark age of ignorance, and a woman who's clearly not intellectually qualified and never has been gets into the top job.
Well, obviously she was sidelined as a VP, wasn't given anything, was given the border mandate, but hadn't been there. But yeah, she not having done a single interview, and we're told, of course, she is now in the lead. Of course, the media would never lie to us, and they would never tell us that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. So again, you take that with a massive pinch of salt, those lies, and then you see, obviously, alternative media, you're involved in with TNT, we're doing Hearts of Oak, and that alternative media, huge support, and that does get the message out for President Trump. And then obviously having Elon Musk in your corner does help. And this election will be different, I think, partially because of where Elon Musk sits with Twitter. But I mean, in 85 days, surely the gloss will come off Kamala. The more she speaks, the better.
I hope so. The things that really bother me about her, the things I infer she believes, in as much as she's able to process any complex strategic thoughts, are that she supports the climate emergency. That's always a really big red light warning sign when a senior politician claims they believe there's a climate emergency. Clearly, they're scientifically illiterate, but it costs the West particularly trillions, while the Far East laughs all the way to the bank because they've no intention of cutting their emissions. They can't cut their emissions because they need to up their emissions to manufacture everything that we don't. I think that she'll have strange and mixed up policies towards that border you mentioned. I understand as much as I can that her Democratic leadership would probably give an amnesty to 10 million illegal migrants. Well, that's as green a light as Keir Starmer has given to legal immigration into the UK. And as for foreign policy, I have no idea what she thinks she would do with Ukraine. Would she carry on giving somebody who I think is, once again, totally unqualified for the job, Vladimir Zelensky, a blank check to carry on fighting an unwinnable war, in my opinion? I don't know, because she doesn't say. The only thing she seems to major on is abortion. And from a tactical point of view, that's risky, because many people who are not keen on abortion will have a stronger, more concrete position saying, well, if we're not keen on abortion, then we'll go towards Trump. So I have to tell you, it's a very difficult question to answer because she's unlikely to have the intellectual capability to come up with coherent answers herself.
Well, I guess her policy will be whatever Barack Hussein Obama does. Yeah. I think the only emergency we will have is tinnitus in American citizens listening to that laugh. Yeah. It would do anyone's hearing in. So I think that's the only emergency that Americans will face. It's so bad. Let's go to UK. Let's touch on what we have faced over the last 3 weeks, and that is the absolute attack on free speech, and actually the in effect the rollout of surveillance. But maybe not get onto that with live facial recognition being rolled out, which is another story. But this here is Operation Early Dawn. This was announced on Monday. And it'd be good to go over it again, and certainly for the US audience to understand it. But this, in The Independent, what is Operation Early Dawn, and why has it been triggered to tackle prison overcrowding? And this discusses the area and the reasons it's needed, when it will be triggered. So, yeah, do you want to fill the audience in on this, Lembit, and why it is one of the, I mean, it's a shameful policy just to release criminals out into the open without any thought of, actually, are they safe or not? Or are the community safe?
Yeah, first the facts and then my opinion on the facts. The facts are, in simple terms, the British government, the Labour Party, is willing to release those serving custodial sentences, therefore for serious crimes, faster than they would otherwise have been released. And I think the inference is that if you've served 40% of your sentence, then you'll get released early in many of these circumstances. It also seems, maybe this isn't quite a fact, but I think there's circumstantial evidence for it. There's some who would have gone to prison, may not go to prison now in order to keep spaces open. Why? Well, now we already get into the position of opinion. My opinion is because the Labour Party have to make space in prison for those who present inconvenient truths to their deranged policies of public order and what's allowed in terms of free speech. What do I mean by that? Over recent weeks, following a horrible triple murder of children in a northern town called Southport, there were riots because people had had enough. And many of those people were just members of the public who'd had enough. But the mainstream media conspired with Keir Starmer. Remember, Keir Starmer, the director of public prosecutions in his day, who didn't one single time lay a legal finger on one of the most prolific paedophiles in the history of the UK, the BBC's very own Jimmy Savile. They conspired to say, oh, well, we have to make an example of some of these demonstrators to make sure that we maintain law and order. Keir Starmer made it worse. Here's a fact. He said that he would protect people who are in mosques and Muslims. Now, this caused Elon Musk to say, well, why don't we want to protect all people? And instead of Starmer saying, you're right, I misspoke, I gave the impression of two-tier policing and two-tier government, he more or less threatened Elon Musk with the ominous specter of some kind of arrest and extradition, which doesn't make any sense to me. So my opinion in putting all of that together, the facts and the sub-opinions, is this. They want to make space for those who speak out against the current government. And they're willing to let out rapists and serious offenders to do that, with one caveat. If you're Councillor Ricky Jones, who was Labour when he said this, and you call for the slashing of the throats of protesters to get rid of them all, unquote, then you can wait 6 to 8 weeks to be tried, even though others who have been on those demonstrations went behind bars within 2 days, including those whose crime was silly commentary on social media. And that is the biggest warning, the biggest hour pointing towards an Orwellian authoritarian regime since this already discredited government came into power.
Let me just pick up that consular. And yeah, it's 48 hours actually from arrest to jail cell if you're regarded as someone who has inconvenient views, certainly in immigration. But yeah, it takes months if you're actually someone different. But that case of the consular, and that, to me, that shows the importance of alternative media, and that is what the government fear, the information getting out, and that's why they've threatened Elon Musk. And if it wasn't for alternative media reporting on that, that consular would not have been arrested. The police would have their own way. And to me, this is a battle between putting out information and informing the public, and the government are hugely fearful of not being able to control the narrative.
Time and again, as you infer, Peter, the mainstream media colludes with the mainstream politicians to silence the majority and those of us who want to call out inconsistencies. In fact, 2 examples. Not long ago, police in the large northern city of Manchester in the United Kingdom were accused of racism. The inference was obviously there, for example, on the BBC. And let's remember, that's a taxpayer paid for service, the BBC, state-sponsored. And then the next day, it turned out that there was a whole piece of video showing apparent thuggery by those at TV the day before had indicated were victims of implicit racism. The only reason I believe that all the other part of the story came out was because of the social networks. Another example. The alleged murdering scum who stabbed children in that town of Southport was, we were told, born in Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales. Born in Cardiff. Well, as soon as we saw that, it was obvious they were trying to cover something up. I suggested that woe betide them if it turns out that the heritage of the person is not Welsh, that it might be, for example, Somalian or Rwandan. And it turned out it was, of course, Rwandan. But my heritage is Estonian. I never make a secret of it. I say I was born in Northern Ireland, but my parents are Estonian. And that's the end of the subject. I got 1.3 million hits on a tweet, the most I've ever got, by calling out the fact that the BBC had attempted, in my view, to mislead the public. So you put all that together, and you are seeing this horrible collusion where the thoughts are being directed in a certain way, and that is what's made people so angry. But now you object to all of that, you can be in prison within 2 days, unless, of course, you're on the other side. And one last example, I know I've made quite a long answer. This week I saw that some man who's clearly Muslim, it's just obvious he's Muslim, attacked a woman in what looks like an unprovoked way in a Nando's, which is a restaurant. And that was in March. No one had covered it. And at time of talking with you, I don't think the BBC has covered it now. But I got large response to a message I sent out yesterday saying, why isn't the BBC covering this? And I think we all know why.
Oh, completely. And we're seeing that. And that's why two-tier care is the tag that's trending. Thank you, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
But just to come today, that today was, as in Friday, one of those girls who were killed, Elsie Dot Stancombe, 7-year-old girl. Her funeral was today, and that's where the anger comes from on this. Of course, her attacker is, as you alluded to, 5 months between being arrested and actually having the trial. And then we have this type of story, and this is, again, that we alluded to this, but child rapist spared jail. And I want to put this up because I think certainly our US audience may not actually believe this, may think, well, there's Lembit and Peter just making up stories. This is what is happening. This was in the Mail. Child rapist spared jail due to overcrowding crisis, as judge says custody was virtually inevitable. A convicted child rapist escaped jail because of the overcrowding in Britain's prisoners. He was handed a suspended sentence last December for the historic rape of a girl under the age of 14 in 2005. Under the terms of the sentence, he was ordered to sign the sex offence register and notify police if he went on holiday. But in May, he went to Egypt without telling officers. And despite breaching it's a suspended sentence. And this has happened again and again. And this is only going to increase anger, isn't it? When people see actually justice has not been done. If someone is, and I don't understand this failure of our institutions to tackle some of the worst crime, which is sexual offences, and especially when it involves children. And we have had decades of our authorities turning a blind eye to this, but it seems common sense. And yet our judges are deciding, sex offences against children, that's fine. You go off on holiday to Egypt. This will make people angry.
This is yes, you're right, Peter. This is what's provoking the public. A public, I have to say, in the United Kingdom, which is long-suffering and very patient and puts up with a lot. But when it comes to abuse of children or the murder of children, the British public won't take it. And it's not far-right extremists running around stirring this up. Maybe they can ride the wave to an extent, but they don't make those waves. And that's my concern, Peter. We've got an uncaring, dead behind the eyes, morally, as far as I can see, administration, which really doesn't recognize it's coming across as sociopathic. 3 examples. Number 1, the director of public prosecutions at the time, Keir Starmer, didn't once take Jimmy Savile to court. You've got to ask, why was he bragging about doing that job if he didn't want his record card to be signed now as not satisfactory? And that might be charitable in the eyes of many. Second point, a rapist of children being allowed a non-custodial sentence while flaunting the rules, while we get people put behind bars for careless comments, and unacceptable ones, that has to be said, but which were later retracted on social media. And then thirdly, perhaps the worst of all in my view, the argument that extreme misogyny, whatever on earth that is a terrorist offense. While you can pretty much do what you want with a fair chance of getting away with it if you happen to have been the highest paid BBC news presenter in the land. I'm referring, of course, to Hugh Edwards. His sentencing hasn't been meted out yet, but he did have, or he did receive, child rape videos of, as I understand it, a boy between 7 and 9 being raped. Now got a 7-year-old child. What has happened to our legal system? Is it any wonder, Peter, that parents and right-minded people think that we now have a hugely politicized criminal justice system and a prime minister who was unable to prosecute one of the most prolific known paedophiles in the history of Britain.
And we've got 4.5 years of this. So the UK citizens, buckle up. It's going to get worse. We're in for a roller coaster. This was a headline from the Guardian about Britain's been worried about far right. And of course, almost 3 in 4 Britons worried about far right after protests. So nearly 3/4 are worried about right-wing extremism after anti-migrant rats. Polling has found with increased numbers concerned about societal divisions. The survey also found that while people generally believe politicians did not react especially well to the wave of disturbances, they generally felt Keir Starmer responded well, while Nigel Farage did not. Well, he responded like a dictator. But obviously it's not 3 in 4, it's whoever the Guardian poll. And this, I think, goes back to the role of the mainstream media actually putting out a narrative, because people read that and they think, oh yeah, I talked to people and they said, oh, I've heard there's going to be a far right. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? I don't know. I just heard it on the BBC. The power of the legacy media, and this is just basically aping, which they've done, of course, during the COVID tyranny, but just repeating the government line. But yeah, this is, again, fear porn being used once again, isn't it, Lembit?
Yes. The Guardian, I don't take seriously. Let's remember the Guardian thinks there's a climate emergency. Anyone who thinks that is evidently scientifically illiterate. And Guardian, if you want to have that conversation with me, let's share the data. And I make a promise on your show here, Peter, if the Guardian can give me data to show that I'm wrong, I'll come back onto your show and say so publicly. And I'll say so also on my show, the Daily News Talk TNT. So Guardian, that is a challenge to you on the climate emergency. But predicated on the assumption that you're not going to change the habits of a lifetime, the Guardian is clearly got a political agenda to suggest the far right is in charge of these protests. And the BBC, which has got a charter responsibility to be unbiased, has jumped on that same bankrupt bandwagon. I know people who were demonstrating. They weren't far right. They weren't extreme. They were parents with children who are really unhappy about the danger they perceive as being imported through unregulated migration into this country, and the frustration they feel about governments which have forgotten the fundamental rule that they are there to serve us. They're at the bottom of the pile. They're not there to rule us. And that's what I think caused an overheating of the country, regardless of what the mainstream media say. What is to be done? Well, you alluded to this before. Hearts of Oak and Today's News Talk, TNT and others are trying to hold them to account. The ultimate irony, Peter, despite not getting a penny of license payers' money, we are the guardians of the BBC's charter. We are the ones who embarrassed the BBC to follow grudgingly to admit that there was more to the story of the Manchester airport attack by apparent thugs, in my view, that the heritage of the boy born in Wales wasn't 100% Welsh, that Hugh Edwards maybe shouldn't have been given a pay rise when his bosses already knew the seriousness of the crimes with which he'd been accused. All of that is why I think the mainstream media is essential, but it's also why we're close to breaking point, close to the point where reasonable people in Britain say, we do not consent. Why not arrest 20 million of us? Where do you find the prison space for that?
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's an interesting journey that we face in the UK, looking for the political solution to this, which is a whole discussion in itself. But let me play this clip of Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer, Champagne Socialist, going to Northern Ireland and telling the Northern Irish what he thought of what happened. So it's just a minute. Let's play this.
I'm in Northern Ireland here today for 3 purposes. Firstly, to meet the PSNI officers who've been on the front line during this disorder. Many of them have been injured. And my purpose was to say to them, thank you for what they have done. We make big asks of them. They step up and they deserve our thanks. I've also had the chance to speak to the PSNI senior leadership about the challenges that they face and the support that they need. And then third, and very importantly, to speak to some of the communities most impacted about the fear that they have, the anxiety that they have about the recent disorder. The disorder is intolerable. It is incapable of justification. It's clearly racist, and it does not represent the modern, forward-looking Northern Ireland that I know that this place is. So I'm very pleased to achieve all those three things today, and to work with all communities, to work with PSNI and others to ensure that we handle this situation, not just the immediate disorder, but also the longer-term work that's necessary to ensure that we have that one Northern Ireland approach that I know represents the Northern Ireland, a modern Northern Ireland of the future.
Well, I'll just read the quote he gave. It is clearly racist, and it does not represent the modern, forward-looking Northern Ireland. What does Keir Starmer know about Northern Ireland? Fill me in, Lembit.
Well, I think I can summarize it in the following phrase: nothing. Because he seems to have missed the fact that those in Northern Ireland were so incensed by the same things that caused those on the mainland of the United Kingdom to march and protest, that the Catholic and the Protestant communities marched together.
Exactly.
Now, that seems to me a bigger statement of how concerned the people of Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, were collectively about something which is also agitating the people in the south of Ireland, I have to say, than any fatuous, putridly superficial accusation that the people that you and I grew up with are racist. I've never thought of Northern Ireland to be racist. In fact, as I grew up, I remember it was one of the first places to welcome what we then called the boat people. And there's a small community of people who were in real trouble at the time, and they were welcomed, and I never noticed there's a problem with that. So I think what he proved is, with his anodyne, poorly educated understanding of Northern Ireland, which in itself isn't that rare, but is unforgivable if you're going to make a speech like that in Belfast, I guess, or wherever he was in Northern Ireland. Well, at that situation, he's only simply provoking everything further. And there's a subtle other point which becomes obvious when I say it. The fact that Starmer was willing to accuse the people of Northern Ireland of racism because they were marching shows he didn't understand anything to do with what was going on across the whole of the UK. And I emphasize again, the people in the south of Ireland who are incensed by the same thing, and you can talk to them, and they're sick of the dilution of their communities by mass and uncontrolled migration.
It was, I mean, utterly tone deaf, not refusing to even recognize. And it doesn't do, I mean, when you're an MP, you're looking for the vote of members of the public. It's not really good to call the public names. It doesn't really fit well, does it?
No, when he calls the people of Northern Ireland racist, he's calling the whole country racist. But then he's busy now ignoring the fact he doesn't actually have a democratic mandate. He got 1 in 6 of those eligible to vote to support him, and actually only 1 in 3 of those who did bother to vote for him. It's just incredible that he can even pretend he's got a mandate. There's a man that should be showing some humility, but he's willing to point the finger of blame, extreme misogynist, racist, far right, and then going to Northern Ireland. It's almost like he's doing it as an ironic joke, going to Northern Ireland where loyalists and Republicans marched together against a common concern. And instead of accepting that he should be listening, as I say, he's the bottom of the damn pile here. He is the bottom servant because he has to be responsible to everybody more than anyone else in Parliament, but he chooses to preach. A man clearly not qualified for the job.
No, and not those pictures of those crowds marching with the Northern Irish flag and the tricolour on the front. It's like, wow, I never thought I would see the day, and it shows the anger. I guess that's what makes the government so worried. With 5 stories, just want to touch just 2 minutes each, just to give an idea of some of the things that have happened. Obviously, if you smash up a building, if you burn down a building, that is wrong, and you must be punished for that. But many people have been caught up. This one was just, I thought, a weird headline. Ratters who waved penis at police officer jailed. And we find that he's been in jail for 2 years and 6 months, or 2 years and 8 months, for exposing himself. I was kind of thinking of like Braveheart, of lifting up the kilt. But I don't know if these type of things surely should be a suspended sentence or a fine or whatever. But 2 years and 8 months, especially with our prisons, I mean, that's why we let them all out. Last Friday, there were, 350 prison places or something left. It's something very stupid to do, but I don't think it needs nearly 3 years in jail, or maybe I'm missing this.
Well, once again, as a libertarian, I wouldn't put someone in prison for that. If they did it in front of my children, that would be one thing. In front of a police officer, really? But okay, let's be consistent. Let's make sure that we put the Eurovision Song Contest entry of the UK in prison, because there was clearly a phallic sexual act being displayed during that performance, which my children happened to be watching. So that was a sex act being figuratively illustrated in front of my 7-year-old child. Needs to go to prison. Let's do the same let's extradite some of the people in the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, where we had overtly sexual illustrations together with male genitalia again. And then we go back to the Eurovision Song Contest. Let's extradite the person where you could see a person's private parts. That was in front of hundreds of millions of people. Why is that acceptable? When this other person was waving his willy in front of presumably a deeply offended police officer, but not my 7-year-old child, Peter. This is the demonic perversion of our society. You don't have to be particularly religious to take umbrage about the fact that on mainstream theoretical family entertainment, you can have sexualized images, leaving nothing to the imagination. But somebody waves his willy at a police officer, when somebody else who's simulating a sex act during one of the gay pride marches walks away as if he's just been having a bit of fun with the WPC. I actually now think that it's the destruction of our society, and it's the willful destruction by very malevolent forces who see the opportunity to destroy the very fabric that used to define our green and pleasant land.
I would call for the arrest of all those in Pride, seeing how disgusting it is. And if you get caught with one of those with your kids, it's horrendous, as I think I did a few years ago, going through London innocently. Here we have pouring cider over a police. A man who poured cider over police, jailed for 21 months, causing violent disorder and assault of a police officer. Is assault pouring it's quite stupid, yes. Again, I don't know if it should be 21 months, but maybe pouring cider is the crime of the decade.
No, it's a crime of the century, because it's a waste of cider. But
I'm with you there.
Once again, the problem here is the police better watch their step, because particularly in London, we've seen the Metropolitan Police employ murderers and rapists. We've seen police in the north of England barely lift a finger to break child sex rings, presumably because they're frightened of the ethnicity of the perpetrators. And we've seen collusion, including in my case. When my phone was hacked, I went to Scotland Yard, I saw the evidence, and they didn't want to do anything about it. Let he who is that blame cast the first stone. I think it's worse to ignore the phone hacking, which pretty much wrecked my life to an extent, to ignore the rape of children, which pretty much wrecked the lives of those children, and to ignore murders perpetrated, or at least to try to play down murders perpetrated by the police, while arresting somebody for throwing cider over the police. This is back to the danger of consent, because they're so close to losing the respect of the public.
They are, and we police by consent, very different from the States. We police by force, and you're right. We are right at the point. I think that has been lost, certainly during the COVID tyranny through many of us. But it's no longer trust the police. Why would I contact the police? Here we have another one. You're not English anymore. Protester jailed after chanting the police, and his 67-year-old man has been jailed after chanting "You're not English anymore" at police officers during a violent demonstration, and that's 20 months. Again, shouting, we've had gesticulating and shouting are now criminal offences, and is the danger that police are able to use whatever seemingly legislation that the public think is for one thing, and the police are able to use it for something else. You're not English anymore. I didn't think that was a crime, but 20 months to keep this dangerous man in jail away from the public so they don't hear those chants ever again.
Perhaps he thought that the police officer was Scottish or Welsh or Parish had thought Northern Irish. This is the problem. I can't even see why it's offensive. No. What has happened to our vanilla sky rainbow warrior law enforcement agency? I'll tell you what's happened. They've been politicized, and they're responding to their paymasters, as is the BBC, as are so many, where you can cover up pedophilia. You can give pay rises for having 41 images of child pornography on your device. You can kill maybe 1.5 million Iraqis on a false prospectus. We don't talk about that much. You can sort of turn a blind eye to the fact that, depending how you measure it, between 2 and 8% of the Gazan population has been killed by a theoretical ally of ours, Benjamin Netanyahu. But woe betide you if you say someone isn't English. If somebody said that to me, I would have no case because I'm not English. But instead, we now have this insane situation where policing has ended and oppression has begun.
Well, you could now, you could get someone arrested, I guess, for saying you're not English, Lembit, but I don't think we'll try and use those new powers that supposedly we get because it'd be stupid. Here we have actually where hate crime goes to dogs. Another interesting headline. So, man jailed for shouting at police dog and using racist slurs. He has been jailed also for 20 months. Father of 3 shouted at a police dog and used racial slurs, jailed for 20 months for violent disorder. I didn't know hate crime went as far as dogs, but maybe police dogs are a specially protected characteristic in our society now.
Perhaps the dog felt hounded. Sorry. It's just, I think all I can say on this is the list that you're highlighting shows why I think we're close to a total fracture between the consent given by those who pay for the police and our politicians and those establishment forces. That's why I meet so many people who say, I never listen to the mainstream media, never listen to the BBC anymore, because I want the truth. It's tragic because if we carry on like this, the country ends up, to quote the Sex Pistols, as anarchy in the UK. And it's all been brought upon the country by those who are meant to serve us. I think that when you start having these brittle, inflexible approaches towards policing, oh, come on, giving a racist slur to a dog, well, at that point, all semblance of common sense has gone out the window. I grieve for the days when you could have a heated discussion with someone and not expect the police to accuse you of a hate crime. But that's what can happen in Scotland. I'm so sad that identity politics means that we have a prime minister who brags about the fact that gay and lesbian communities are overrepresented by 300% in Parliament. I don't understand. What's the limit? Does he want 100% to be gay and lesbian? Is it 80%? And he can't see that proportionality would suggest it would be near like between 1.8 and 3.5, depending how you measure it. All of this adds up to the fact that we know we haven't got a government which is proportionate in its thinking or in its targets. I just want to have an ordinary life where I can pay my bills, do my job, challenge authority to an extent, and have my kids with right thinking optimism without being afraid of causing offense to their friends or strangers or a police dog just because they say something inopportune. And I want to live in a country, Peter, where rapists aren't released so that angry people are incarcerated. Let's see where this goes. Let's see if the establishment carries on allowing people who killed over 1 million Iraqis to carry on walking scot-free because it's not really a crime, while the rest of us suffer the jackboot, which so tragically George Orwell rightly predicted was coming. The only thing he got wrong was the year.
No, completely. We'll just finish off on this one, and it just shows it's not actually people participating in violence. It's not even people just bystanders and walking past, but keyboard warrior jailed for part in UK disorder, a man who posted material on social media to stir up racial hatred. Maybe he was just reporting, but during the recent unrest in the UK, has been jailed for 3 years. Wayne O'Rourke, who had more than 90,000 followers on his X account, posted misinformation about the killing of 3 young girls. And then it goes on and on. 3 years in jail, and it ends up, the court was told he admitted receiving about £1,400 a month in payments for his account. I didn't know that was a crime. Maybe it is a crime. Maybe it's the latest crime. But yeah, it's this whole thing to finish off on, to remind the viewers and listeners that it's not just those actually participating in violent disorder, which the media tell us. It's people actually sitting home, and instigating means reporting. It means highlighting, and that's what Elon Musk has done. But this seems to be a crime, and they want to come after people sitting at home using social media. And this is what the government really fears, isn't it, Lembit?
I think you're right. And it's tragic to admit we now have a government which thinks we're all so dumb that we believe everything that's said, and that we have to be protected from lies and misinformation just in case we swallow the untruths. But there is one glimmer of hope. Maybe we can stay on a positive note at the end here, Peter. That means that those who disrupt our society, who cost us inconvenience in our lives, maybe cost us money too, can be prosecuted under these laws. So, amongst those who need to go to prison, or at least be prosecuted, Ed Miliband for spreading lies about the cost of solar panels and renewables. Many people may follow that advice and cost themselves a fortune, as I did, because I've got solar panels. What a stupid mistake I made. It also means that Yvette Cooper, who seems to be stirring up hatred towards misogynists while doing nothing about misandrists, maybe she's falling foul. And then there's Keir Starmer, who basically presides over all of this and tells us he's going to protect those from mosques and Muslims by inference because of a sin of omission, not mentioning others. So be careful what you wish for. It could be that because of the short-sightedness of the people we're talking about in government, the boomerang hits them at the back of the neck. I don't want any of this. I want the government to wise up. I want them to do a good job. I want to just live in peace and harmony. But when you've got a government that can't see the plank in their own eye, they should stop complaining about the might in ours.
Not completely, Lembit. Thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, the viewers and listeners get you tntradio.live every Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., the 2-hour slot in the morning. That's UK time. For those on Eastern time, it would be 3 a.m. So if you're early birds or don't get to sleep, you can tune into Lembit or midnight on PST, Pacific time. But Lembit, thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.